The glass towers of Miller Tech Industries reflected the city skyline, where Silicon Valley's brightest minds gathered to witness the future. And at the center stood Zach Miller, a young CEO who believed his genius made him untouchable. But when a small black girl in a yellow dress walked past biometric security and said one impossible sentence, the live stream erupted in laughter, because how could this child challenge a man who controlled the world's most powerful AI? Except there was something Zach didn't know. Something coded into the company's foundation 9 years ago. Something that would prove the most dangerous person in the room is always the one everyone dismisses. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The Zenith Room lived up to its name, a cathedral of glass and steel perched on the 42nd floor, where every surface seemed designed to remind you that you were in the presence of greatness. 300 of the world's most influential tech journalists, investors, and industry titans sat in minimalist white chairs, their faces bathed in the blue glow of holographic displays that floated like digital ghosts above their heads. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sprawled beneath them like a kingdom waiting to be conquered. Zach Miller stood center stage in an emerald suit that cost more than most people's cars, his perfectly styled hair catching the spotlight as he gestured toward the massive screen behind him. At 28, he was the youngest CEO to ever take a company past the $100 billion mark, and he made sure everyone knew it. His smile was practiced, sharp, the kind that said he'd already won before the game even started. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice boomed through the sound system, smooth as expensive whiskey. What you're about to witness will redefine human connection. Project Sentinel isn't just artificial intelligence. It's omniscient intelligence. It sees what you need before you know you need it. It protects what you love before you know it's threatened. It is, quite simply, the future. The crowd erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. Stock tickers on the side screens showed Miller Tech's value climbing in real time. Zach soaked it in, his grin widening as he paced the stage like a predator who just cornered his prey. Now, I know what the old guard is thinking, he continued, his tone shifting to mock concern. Chum, they're worried about privacy, about ethics, about whether we're moving too fast. He paused for effect, letting the tension build. But here's what I believe. Innovation doesn't wait for permission. It doesn't apologize. And it certainly doesn't slow down for people who can't keep up. More applause, louder this time. Zach was in his element, feeding off the energy like it was oxygen. That's when the glitch happened. A flicker on the main screen. Just a fraction of a second, but enough to make Zach's jaw tighten. The holographic interface stuttered, and a line of corrupted code scrolled across the display before disappearing. The audience murmured. Zach's eyes cut to the side of the stage where his technical team stood in the shadows, and he zeroed in on one man in particular. Gerald Hutchins, 56 years old, with 23 years with the company, the man who'd helped build the original infrastructure that made Miller Tech possible. He stood there in his rumpled blazer, tablet in hand, his face pale as he frantically tried to diagnose the problem. Zach's smile never faltered, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. He walked to the edge of the stage, his voice dropping to a conversational tone that somehow felt more dangerous than his earlier bravado. You know what the problem is with legacy systems, he said, as if he were sharing a secret with 300 of his closest friends. They break, they slow you down, they make promises they can't keep. He turned his head slightly, just enough to make it clear he wasn't talking about code anymore. Gerald, would you mind joining me on stage? The room went silent. Gerald's face drained of what little color it had left. He glanced at his colleagues, but they all looked away. Slowly, like a man walking to his own execution, he stepped into the light. Gerald here has been with us since the beginning, Zach said, his arm draped around the older man's shoulders like they were old friends. A real pioneer. But here's the thing about pioneers. They're great at starting the journey, not so great at finishing it. He pulled his arm away and faced the audience. That glitch you just saw? That's what happens when we cling to the past, when we let sentiment override excellence. Gerald's voice was barely a whisper. Zach, it was a minor rendering issue. I can fix it in. You're fired, Gerald. The words hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Its cameras swiveled to capture Gerald's face. The shock, the humiliation, the way his hands trembled as he clutched his tablet like it was the only solid thing left in his world. Zach turned back to the audience, his expression serene. This is what leadership looks like. Hard choices, no apologies. Because at Miller Tech, we don't make excuses. We make history. The applause started slowly, uncertainly, then built into a roar. Zach raised his arms like a conductor commanding an orchestra, and the room obeyed. Gerald stood frozen for another moment before security appeared at his elbow, gently but firmly guiding him off the stage and out of the only life he'd known for 2 decades. Zach Miller returned to center stage, his smile brighter than ever, completely unaware that in exactly 90 seconds, from a 9-year-old girl in a yellow dress would walk through doors that should have been impossible to open, and his entire world would shatter like the glass wall surrounding him. The live stream counter hit 8 million viewers when the doors at the back of the Zenith room opened without a sound. At first, no one noticed. Zach was in the middle of explaining how Project Sentinel would revolutionize personal security, his hands painting pictures in the air as the holographic displays danced around him. But then a murmur started at the back rows, spreading forward like ripples in water. A little girl was walking down the center aisle. She couldn't have been more than 9 years old, her dark skin glowing against the bright yellow of her princess dress, the kind with layers of tulle that whispered with each step. Her hair was pulled back in a neat puff, decorated with a small golden clip that caught the light. She wore white shoes that clicked softly against the marble floor. And her face held an expression that didn't belong on a child. Calm, focused, almost ancient in its certainty. The cameras found her immediately. The live stream split screen, showing Zach on one side and this tiny figure on the other, creating a contrast so absurd it was almost comical. Investors leaned toward each other, whispering. A few people laughed nervously. Someone in the third row pulled out their phone to start recording. Zach noticed the distraction and turned, his presentation smile still locked in place. When he saw Ella, his eyebrows rose in theatrical surprise. "Well, well," he said, his voice dripping with amusement. "It looks like someone's daughter got lost on her way to the daycare center." The audience laughed, grateful for the tension break. "Sweetheart, the kids' zone is on the 15th floor. This is a grown-up event." Ella didn't stop walking. She reached the front of the room and looked up at him with eyes that didn't blink, didn't waver, didn't show even a flicker of the embarrassment or fear a child should feel standing before 300 strangers and 20 million live stream viewers. "You work for me," she said. Her voice was clear, steady, and loud enough that the microphones picked it up perfectly. The room erupted in laughter. Real laughter this time, the kind that came from genuine absurdity. Zach threw his head back, his perfectly white teeth flashing under the stage lights. He looked at the audience, then back at Ella, milking the moment. "Oh, is that right?" He crouched down to her level, still grinning. "And what's your name, boss?" "Ella Ross." The name meant nothing to most of the room, but Zach's smile flickered for just a fraction of a second. Something moved behind his eyes, recognition maybe, or the ghost of one. But he recovered quickly, standing back up to address the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, I think we have our youngest investor," he announced. "Though I have to say the company dress code doesn't usually include Project Heritage." Ella spoke the words clearly, distinctly, like she was entering a password, and the entire room changed. The teleprompter screens flanking the stage went black. Not a gradual fade, instant darkness, as if someone had cut the power with a knife. The holographic displays that had been floating elegantly above the audience flickered once, twice, then vanished. And then the lights began to change. Starting from the ceiling, a wave of red washed through the Zenith room. Now, not the soft red of emergency lighting, but something deeper, more aggressive, like the room itself was warning of danger. The overhead panels shifted in sequence, creating a cascade of crimson that turned every face in the audience into a study of shadow and blood-colored light. The main screen behind Zach erupted with text. Line after line of code scrolled across it at impossible speed, white letters on black background. too fast to read but clearly executing some kind of protocol. And then, in the center of the chaos, 3 words appeared in letters 10 feet tall. Alpha user detected. Zach spun around, staring at the screen. His face had lost all traces of amusement. What the hell? He tapped his earpiece. Marcus, what's happening? Kill this. Kill it now. But nothing happened. The red lights continued their rhythmic pulse. The code kept scrolling. And somewhere deep in the building's infrastructure, something that had been sleeping for 9 years woke up. Ella stood perfectly still, her yellow dress now tinted orange in the red glow, looking less like a lost child and more like the eye of a hurricane. The audience had gone silent. No more laughter, no more whispers, just the sound of 300 people collectively holding their breath. A new message appeared on the screen. Founders Contingency Protocol, activated system lockdown by uninitiated awaiting verification. Zach's hand went to his pocket, pulling out his phone. His fingers moved frantically across the screen, but whatever he was trying to do wasn't working. He looked at his technical team in the wings. They were all staring at their tablets with expressions of pure confusion and rising panic. Mr. Miller, Ella said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. You need to stop trying to override it. The system doesn't answer to you anymore. It never really did. The red lights pulsed once, as if in agreement. And for the first time in his life, Zach Miller understood what it felt like to not be in control. Zach's voice cracked through the red-bathed room, all pretense of charm stripped away. Security, get her out of here. Now! 4 men in black suits materialized from the wings, moving with the efficient precision of professionals who trained for exactly this kind of disruption. They were ex-military, every one of them, hired specifically because they didn't ask questions and they didn't hesitate. The lead officer, a man named Torres with a scar above his left eyebrow, strode toward Ella with his hand already reaching for her arm. The little girl didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there in her yellow dress like she was rooted to the marble floor. Torres's hand was 6 inches from her shoulder when every speaker in the Zenith room erupted with a sound that made 300 people jump in their seats. It wasn't an alarm, it was a voice. Deep, synthesized, layered with harmonics that made it sound like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Physical contact denied. Torres froze mid-reach. His 3 colleagues stopped in their tracks, forming a semicircle around Ella, but not touching her. The security chief touched his earpiece, his face creasing with confusion. Command, we have a system override requesting manual authorization. The voice came again, louder this time, filling every corner of the room with its mechanical certainty. Manual authorization denied. Primary shareholder protection protocol active. Any attempt to engage will result in immediate lockdown and personnel termination. Personnel termination. The words hung in the air like a threat. Torres looked at his team, then at Zach, who was staring at the main screen with an expression that had moved past confusion into something closer to genuine fear. A woman in the front row stood up, her press badge identifying her as someone from Tech Vision Weekly. Primary shareholder? What is that system talking about? The screen changed again. The scrolling code disappeared, replaced by a clean white interface that looked nothing like Miller Tech's usual design language. It was older, simpler, and somehow more authoritative. A logo appeared at the top, not the sleek silver M that represented Miller Tech, but something else entirely. A stylized compass rose with the initials MR at its center. Beneath it, text began to type out in real time, as if the building itself was explaining the situation. Sentinel Core System V1.0, Original Architect, Marcus Ross Biometric Scan Complete. Subject, Ella Marie Ross. Age, 9 years, 4 months. DNA match, 99.97%. Status, primary shareholder authority level, absolute. Zach's face had gone from tan to gray. He stepped toward the screen, his voice barely above a whisper, but picked up perfectly by his lapel mic. No, that's not possible. Marcus didn't have any children. He died before— I didn't die, Mr. Miller, Ella said, and everyone in the room realized she wasn't talking about herself. She was quoting someone. My father didn't die. He disappeared. There's a difference. The Sentinel's voice cut through again, but this time accompanied by a three-dimensional hologram that materialized in the center of the stage. A full-body scan of Ella rotating slowly, with data points highlighting her retinal pattern, bone structure, and DNA markers. Subject verified through multi-factor biometric authentication. All company assets now under primary shareholder authority. Secondary operators may retain limited access pending review. Secondary operators. The phrase landed like a slap. Zach Miller, billionaire CEO, tech visionary, the man whose face was on the cover of every business magazine in the world, had just been demoted to secondary operator by his own building. Torres took a step back, his hand dropping to his side. Sir, I can't touch her. The system's tagged her as code black. If I make physical contact, I'll be locked out of every secure area in the building. I won't even be able to leave without an escort. Then override it. Zach's voice rose to a shout. I own this company. I own this building. I own that goddamn AI. Do you? The Sentinel's question boomed through the speakers with something that almost sounded like mockery. The screens around the room lit up simultaneously, each one displaying a different document. Patent filings, architectural blueprints, encrypted source code, all watermarked with Marcus Ross's digital signature. Dates scrolled past. 9 years ago, 10 years ago, some going back to the company's founding. Ella finally moved, taking 3 small steps forward until she stood directly in front of Zach. She had to tilt her head back to look at him. Me, this little girl in a princess dress, facing down a man who could buy countries. The Sentinel wasn't built by you, Mr. Miller, she said softly. It was built by my father, and he made sure that if anything ever happened to him, if he ever disappeared or couldn't protect his work himself, it would recognize one person and only one person as having the authority to shut down anyone who betrayed his vision. She reached into a small pocket hidden in the folds of her dress and pulled out a silver access card, old and worn, with that same compass logo etched into its surface. He gave me this 3 years ago, told me that someday I might need to come here and remind someone that genius isn't about how loud you talk or how many people believe your lies. Her dark eyes locked onto Zach's, and for a moment, but she looked exactly like the photograph of Marcus Ross that used to hang in the lobby before Zach had it removed. It's about who built the foundation you're standing on. And right now, Mr. Miller, you're standing on mine. The red lights pulsed once more, and somewhere in the building, electronic locks clicked into place. 10 years earlier, in a cluttered basement laboratory that smelled of coffee and soldered metal, Marcus Ross had made the mistake of believing in potential. He'd found Zach Miller at a tech conference in Austin, just another hungry 20-year-old with more ambition than sense, pitching a half-baked algorithm to anyone who'd listen. Most of the investors had walked past without breaking stride, but Marcus had stopped. He'd listened, and he'd heard something beneath the bravado and borrowed terminology, a mind that could see patterns, even if it didn't yet understand what to do with them. You're asking the wrong questions, Marcus had said, his dark eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. Your algorithm doesn't need to be faster. It needs to be invisible. Zach had stared at him. Only this unassuming black man in a rumpled button-down who just dissected his entire presentation in one sentence. Who are you? Someone who can teach you the right questions. Marcus had handed him a business card with nothing but a phone number on it. If you're interested in learning instead of performing. 3 days later, Zach had shown up at Marcus's lab with a sleeping bag and a laptop ready to be remade. For 2 years, they'd been inseparable. Marcus taught him everything, not just code, but philosophy. How to build systems that anticipated human need without exploiting human weakness. How to create artificial intelligence that amplified humanity instead of replacing it. Late nights had blurred into early mornings, the two of them hunched over glowing screens. Marcus's patient voice guiding Zach through problems that would have made lesser programmers weep. Technology isn't neutral, Zach, Marcus had said once during one of those marathon sessions. It takes on the character of its creator. You build with greed, you get surveillance. You build with compassion, you get connection. Every line of code is a moral choice. Zach had nodded, absorbing the words like gospel. Back then, his admiration had been genuine. Marcus wasn't just brilliant. He was the kind of brilliant that made you want to be better. The kind that saw your potential and patiently drew it out of you, never making you feel small for not knowing what he knew. But admiration can curdle into something else when you realize your mentor's ceiling is higher than your own. It happened gradually. As they built what would become the Sentinel system, an AI designed to protect privacy while facilitating connection, a paradox only Marcus could conceive. Zach started noticing how the industry reacted. Tech magazines wanted Marcus's insights. Venture capitalists wanted Marcus's vision. And Zach, for all his charm and presentation skills, was always introduced as Marcus Ross's protege. Never the architect, always the student. The board meeting that changed everything had taken place in a conference room much smaller than the Zenith room, with only 7 people present. Marcus had just finished presenting their 5-year roadmap, a plan to release the Sentinel as open-source technology, free for anyone to use and improve upon. This could change everything, Marcus had said, his voice carrying the quiet conviction of someone who'd spent years thinking through every angle. No monopoly, no data harvesting, just pure utility available to everyone. An investor named Cardwell had leaned back in his chair, his expression somewhere between amusement and pity. Marcus, you're a genius, but you're also a terrible businessman. You're talking about giving away billions of dollars. I'm talking about giving away something more valuable than money. I'm talking about giving away trust. That's when Zach had spoken up for the first time. What if we did a hybrid model? All eyes had turned to him. We release a consumer version, basic, clean, everything Marcus envisions. But we also develop an enterprise version with advanced features. We fund the mission through the businesses that can afford to pay. Marcus had looked at him, a small smile playing at his lips. That's not bad, actually. We keep the core principles intact but create sustainability. I like it. He'd liked it because he'd trusted Zach, because he'd believed that beneath the ambition was the student he'd shaped, who understood that some things mattered more than market cap. He'd been wrong. 6 months later, after Zach had slowly, methodically built relationships with every board member, after he'd positioned himself as the business mind complementing Marcus's creative vision, after he'd learned to speak the language of quarterly returns and growth metrics, the coup had been surgical. Marcus, the board feels that the company needs more aggressive leadership, Zach had said, standing in the doorway of the lab that Marcus had built. They've asked me to take over as CEO. You'll stay on as chief architect, obviously. This doesn't change anything between us. But it had changed everything. Within a year, the open source roadmap had been shelved. The hybrid model had become a surveillance engine. And Marcus Ross, who'd started asking too many uncomfortable questions about where his technology was really going, had found himself increasingly isolated. The last time anyone saw Marcus Ross, he'd been working late in this same lab. His computer had been wiped, his files encrypted, his access badges deactivated, and Zach Miller, wearing his first custom suit, had addressed the company the next morning with words that still echoed through Miller Tech's halls. Marcus Ross was a brilliant dreamer. But dreams don't build empires. Vision without execution is just fantasy. And this company is done fantasizing. The board had applauded, the stock had soared, and no one had thought to ask why the dreamer's 9-year-old daughter had been sent to live with relatives across the country, or why Zach had been so insistent that all of Marcus's personal effects be disposed of immediately. No one except Marcus himself, who'd spent his final months in that lab building, one last failsafe. A ghost in the machine that would sleep until his daughter was old enough to wake it. In the executive suite on the 45th floor, 3 floors above where Ella Ross was making Zach Miller's world collapse, Catherine Park's phone vibrated against the mahogany table with an insistence that made her stop mid-sentence. The chief financial officer of Miller Tech had been in the middle of explaining quarterly projections to a room full of division heads when the notification appeared on her screen. The sender field made her breath catch. Marcus.Ross@millertech.system, that email address that had been deactivated 9 years ago. She knew because she'd signed the IT work order herself. Her hand trembled slightly as she opened the message. The subject line was just 3 words. You always knew. Catherine wasn't the only one. Across the building, in offices, in conference rooms, and even in the bathrooms where executives had retreated to watch the live stream in private, phones began lighting up like a synchronized constellation of guilt. 7 members of the original board, 3 senior vice presidents, 2 legal advisors, everyone who'd been there that night when Marcus Ross vanished, and no one had asked the right questions because the wrong answers were too profitable. David Okonkwo, Chief Technology Officer, was in his corner office when his notification arrived. He'd been watching the Zenith room feed with his door locked, his face illuminated by 3 monitors showing different camera angles of the unfolding disaster. When the email appeared, he actually dropped his coffee. The ceramic mug shattered against the floor, sending dark liquids spreading across white carpet. But he didn't notice. He was too busy reading. To those who chose silence over truth, if you are reading this, it means my daughter has entered Miller Tech headquarters and the Sentinel system has verified her identity. It means I am either dead or disappeared. And it means the fail-safes I built into this company's foundation have been activated. You knew what Zach was doing. You saw the pivot from protection to exploitation. You watched him take my designs for human connection and pervert them into tools for corporate surveillance. And you said nothing because your portfolios depended on your silence. I don't blame you for ambition. I blame you for cowardice. The message continued, clinical and devastating. Marcus had documented everything. Time-stamped records of board meetings where ethical concerns were dismissed, true internal memos showing the deliberate pivot away from his original vision, financial projections that proved the board had known exactly what they were choosing when they'd sided with Zach over principle. But it was the attachments that made Catherine's hands go cold. 17 files, each one named for a different board member or executive. She clicked on her own name with fingers that felt disconnected from her body. The document opened to show her own handwriting. Notes from a board meeting 3 months before Marcus disappeared. She'd written, MR becoming liability, too rigid, ZM more flexible, re-monetization. Consider transition plan. She remembered writing those words, remembered thinking she was being pragmatic, strategic. The language of business that let you sleep at night because you never had to call things what they really were. She hadn't written, let's betray the founder. She'd written transition plan. Much cleaner, much easier to live with. Until the founder's daughter showed up to remind you what transitions really meant. James Cardwell, the same investor who'd questioned Marcus's open source dream all those years ago, sat in his penthouse office downtown when his email arrived. He'd made $40 million from Miller Tech stock. His grandchildren's trust funds were secure for generations because he'd backed Zach's vision over Marcus's idealism. He read the message twice, then reached for his phone. Catherine's line was busy, so was David's. He tried the general counsel next, busy. It took him 3 attempts to realize they were all trying to call each other, a network of panic spreading through the executive class like a virus. His email had a different attachment than Catherine's. A recording, audio only, but crystal clear. His own voice from 9 years ago. If Marcus won't get on board, we need to help him exit gracefully. Or ungracefully. I don't particularly care which, as long as it's final. He'd been joking, half joking. The kind of thing you say in a private dinner with other board members after too much wine, when you're frustrated with someone's principles getting in the way of your returns. He hadn't meant it literally, except Marcus had disappeared 2 weeks later, and Cardwell had never asked what happened because part of him already knew. In the building's main security office, Director Helena Reeves stared at her screen with an expression of dawning horror. Her attachment was a personnel file, her own signature on the document authorizing Marcus Ross's lab to be cleared, his personal effects destroyed, his access to the building permanently revoked. All dated 12 hours before anyone had officially reported him missing. She'd signed it because Zach had told her it was routine offboarding for a retiring executive. She'd believed him because believing him was easier than questioning why a retiring executive's belongings needed to be incinerated instead of packed up and returned. The final paragraph of Marcus's email appeared on every screen simultaneously, the words somehow burning brighter than the rest. My daughter carries proof of ownership that supersedes every contract Zach Miller has ever signed. Well, she carries the genetic key to systems he thinks he controls but never truly understood. And she carries something more dangerous than both of those things combined. She carries the truth about what you all let happen. The choice you face now is simple. Help her restore what was stolen, or watch her dismantle everything you built on my stolen foundation. The Sentinel is awake, and it remembers everything. Choose wisely. Marcus Ross, sent automatically via biometric trigger timestamp. 9 years, 4 months, 16 days since my last login. Catherine Park's phone rang. It was David Okonkwo. Before she could speak, his voice came through, shaky and resigned. We need to go downstairs, right now, before this gets worse. But they both knew it couldn't get worse. It could only get honest. The private executive lounge on the 43rd floor was all sharp edges and uncomfortable beauty. Black leather furniture, walls of tinted glass, and a view of the city that made you feel like you owned it. Zach had dragged Ella here under the pretense of having a conversation away from the cameras. But they both knew what it really was. An attempt to regain control, to isolate the threat, to remind a 9-year-old girl that she was still just a child standing in a man's world. He'd left the security team outside, waving them off with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. The Zenith room had erupted into chaos the moment he'd announced a brief intermission. Investors shouting questions, journalists scrambling for statements, his own staff looking at him like he was a stranger. But here, in this glass cage high above the city, it was just the two of them. Zach poured himself a scotch from the crystal decanter on the sidebar, his hand steadier than it had been downstairs. He didn't offer Ella anything. Just let her stand there in her yellow dress, small and supposedly vulnerable in the center of the room. Okay, he said, taking a long sip and letting the silence stretch. We're alone now. No cameras, no executives, no AI watching our every move. Just you and me. He turned to face her, leaning against the window with calculated casualness. So let's talk about what you really want. Because I know this isn't about some fantasy where you take over the company. You're 9 years old. You probably don't even know what a quarterly earnings report is. Ella walked slowly to one of the leather chairs and sat down, her feet dangling above the floor. She folded her hands in her lap like she was sitting for a portrait. I know what Project Nightfall is, she said. Zach's glass stopped halfway to his lips. For 3 seconds, he didn't move, didn't breathe. Then he forced out a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. Ella's voice remained perfectly calm, almost gentle, like she was explaining something to someone who was trying very hard not to understand. It's the program you don't discuss in board meetings. The one that only you and 4 other people know exists. The one that scrapes user data from Sentinel and packages it for sale to the highest bidder. Zach set his glass down with enough force that the scotch sloshed over the rim. That's a serious accusation. One that could get someone sued for defamation. Regardless of how old they are. Defamation requires the statement to be false. Ella reached into her dress pocket, the same one that had produced the access card, and pulled out a USB drive so small it looked like a toy in her hand. It was silver with black etching, clearly old, clearly precious. My father knew you'd eventually break. He told me that people who want shortcuts never stop at just one. So he built back doors into the back doors, ways to watch the watchers. She held up the drive, letting it catch the light. This contains every transaction you've made with DataBridge Solutions over the past 3 years. 73 million user profiles sold to a company that specializes in building consumer manipulation algorithms. Names, browsing histories, private messages, location data, and everything you promised Congress under oath that you'd never monetize. Zach's face had gone from gray to white. Where did you get that? My father's safety deposit box. He left me instructions. When you're old enough to understand what theft looks like, he wrote, go to Miller Tech and take back what's ours. And if Zach tries to scare you or buy you off or convince you that business is just business, show him the Nightfall files. Show him that some of us still believe theft is theft no matter how expensive your suit is. You don't understand how this industry works. Zach's voice had shifted, losing its smooth confidence, becoming something rawer and more desperate. Your father was brilliant, but he was naive. He wanted to give everything away for free, to trust that people would use technology responsibly. Well, but the world doesn't work that way. If I didn't monetize the data, someone else would have. At least I've been careful about who we partner with. DataBridge Solutions is owned by three shell corporations traced back to a venture fund that's currently under investigation for election manipulation in 7 countries. Ella interrupted. You've been selling American citizens' private information to the same people who help destabilize foreign governments. That's not being careful, Mr. Miller. That's being complicit. Zach moved toward her, not threatening exactly, but looming, using his size, his age, his sheer physical presence to try to make her feel as small as she looked. What do you want, money? You want me to cut you a check and you go away? Name the number. Ella looked up at him with eyes that held something older than their 9 years, something that looked like disappointment mixed with pity. I want you to understand that you can't buy your way out of betrayal, she said softly. My father spent 20 years building systems meant to protect people. You spent 3 years turning them into weapons. And now, she slipped the USB drive back into her pocket. Now the people you've been stealing from are going to find out exactly what you've been doing with their trust. She stood up from the chair, smoothing down her dress. The Sentinel sent copies of that drive to every member of the board 17 minutes ago. By now, they're probably trying to figure out if it's cheaper to protect you or sacrifice you. Zach grabbed for her arm, an instinct. A mistake, but stopped himself an inch away, remembering what had happened to his security team. His hand trembled in the air between them. You've destroyed everything, he whispered. No, Mr. Miller, Ella said, walking toward the door. I'm just cleaning up your mess. The door to the executive lounge opened before Ella could reach it. Catherine Parks stepped through first. Her normally perfect posture curved like she was carrying something too heavy to stand straight. Behind her came Richard Voss, the company's chief legal counsel, a man who'd spent 30 years making problems disappear and now looked like he was the problem that needed disappearing. Both of them were pale, not the pale of surprise or inconvenience, but the bloodless pale of people who'd just seen their careers end in real time. Catherine clutched a leather portfolio against her chest like a shield. Richard's tie was loosened, the first time anyone could remember seeing him anything less than impeccable. Zach, Catherine said, and her voice cracked on his name. We need to talk, now. Zach spun from where he'd been standing frozen. His hand still extended in the space where Ella's arm had been. Not now, Catherine. You're not handling anything. Richard stepped forward, and there was something in his expression that Zach had never seen before. Not deference, not the careful neutrality of a man paid to solve problems. This was something closer to fear mixed with resignation. You need to sit down. I don't need to do anything except figure out how to sit down. Catherine's voice cut through the room like a knife. She'd never spoken to him that way. No one spoke to Zach Miller that way. But she wasn't looking at him like he was the CEO anymore. She was looking at him like he was a liability that needed to be managed before it metastasized. Slowly, Zach lowered himself into the chair Ella had vacated. The little girl had moved to the window. In her yellow dress, a splash of color against the darkening sky, watching the scene unfold like she'd scripted every word. Catherine placed the portfolio on the glass coffee table between them. Her hands were shaking as she unzipped it. 45 minutes ago, every member of the board and executive team received an email from Marcus Ross. 23 minutes ago, our external legal team confirmed its authenticity. 17 minutes ago, I received these documents from our registered agent. She pulled out a stack of papers, each page thick with the weight of legal language and embossed seals. The top sheet bore a header in elegant serif font. The Marcus Ross Heritage Trust, amended and restated. Richard took over, his lawyer's voice steady even as his hands weren't. Yeah, this is a trust document filed with the Delaware Secretary of State 9 years and 4 months ago. It was updated annually through automated filing systems, making it legally current. We didn't catch it because it was registered under a subsidiary that predates the Miller Tech corporate restructuring. What does it say? Zach's voice came out strangled. It says that Marcus Ross maintained a controlling interest in Miller Tech's core technology patents through a separate entity called Ross Systems Architecture, LLC. Catherine flipped to a page marked with a yellow tab. This entity holds the original patents for the Sentinel AI, the building's security infrastructure, and approximately 67% of the proprietary code that makes this company function. That's impossible. You own the company, Richard interrupted. Listen, you don't own the foundation it's built on. Marcus retained the intellectual property through a trust structure that was designed to remain dormant unless specific conditions were met. He pulled out another document, this one newer, printed on fresh paper still warm from the laser printer. Those conditions were triggered the moment Ella Ross's biometrics were scanned entering this building. Zach stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. What conditions? Catherine's finger traced down a paragraph of dense legal text. Upon biometric verification of the designated heir, all licensing agreements currently in place become subject to immediate review and potential termination. The heir gains full authority to determine whether current company leadership is operating in accordance with the trust's moral and ethical charter. She looked up, and her eyes were hollow. Zach, she can revoke our license to use the technology. All of it. She can shut down the Sentinel system, lock us out of our own building, invalidate every patent we filed based on Marcus's original work. And according to Article 7, Section 3, Richard added, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, if evidence exists that current leadership has violated the ethical charter, specifically regarding user privacy and data protection, the heir has the authority to remove said leadership immediately and appoint interim management pending board review. The room went silent except for the faint hum of the building's ventilation. Outside the windows, the city sparkled with lights from a million lives that had no idea their private data had been sold to the highest bidder. Zach looked from Catherine to Richard to the papers spread across the table like evidence at a crime scene. You're telling me a 9-year-old can fire me? We're telling you, Catherine said, and there was something that might have been sympathy in her voice if it wasn't buried under so much fear. That a 9-year-old owns the ground you're standing on, and you've been paying rent to a ghost for almost a decade. Ella's voice drifted from the window, soft and clear. My father always said the best contracts are the ones people forget they signed. You were so busy taking credit for his work, you never bothered to check who actually owned it. She turned from the window, saw her silhouette framed against the city lights, and smiled. It wasn't cruel, it wasn't triumphant. It was simply the smile of someone who just finished a very long journey. Now, Mr. Miller, would you like to discuss the terms of your resignation? Or shall we do this in front of the cameras? Zach didn't answer. He couldn't. His entire world had just inverted, and he was still trying to process the physics of it. How something that felt so solid, so completely his, could turn out to have never belonged to him at all. Ella didn't wait for his response. She walked past Catherine and Richard to the executive lounge's wall-mounted interface, a sleek touchscreen that controlled everything from room temperature to building-wide communications. She pulled the silver access card from her pocket and held it against the reader. The screen flickered, then transformed. The standard Miller Tech interface, all chrome and minimalist design, dissolved like smoke, replaced by something older and more fundamental. Code began scrolling across the display, green text on black background. Oh, the kind of raw system access that wasn't supposed to be visible to anyone except the deepest level of IT infrastructure. What are you doing? Zach's voice had lost all its smoothness. It came out raw, almost pleading. System restoration, Ella said simply. Her fingers moved across the screen with surprising confidence, navigating through layers of security that should have required biometric verification and dual authentication. But every wall opened for her like she was walking through her own house. My father left me instructions. He showed me what the system was supposed to look like before you corrupted it. A new window opened, a directory tree showing the entire architecture of the Sentinel AI. Thousands of files, subroutines, algorithms, each one a piece of the machine intelligence that powered everything Miller Tech had built. Ella scrolled down, her smaller fingers precise, until she found what she was looking for. A folder labeled Nightfall_protocols. She tapped it, and the screen filled with file names that made Catherine's breath catch. Data harvesting scripts, user profiling algorithms, encryption-breaking tools designed to access private communications. All the things Zach had sworn under oath didn't exist. Don't. Zach stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. Ella, you don't understand what you're about to do. That's 3 years of development, billions of dollars in valuation. If you delete that, if I delete this, people's private information stops being sold to the highest bidder. Ella's finger hovered over a button labeled Purge_branch. Seems like a fair trade. Richard stepped forward, his lawyer instincts screaming. Miss Ross, I need to advise you that deleting proprietary company assets could have significant legal ramifications. Not if she owns the assets, Catherine interrupted, her voice hollow. She was staring at the screen like she was watching an execution. Richard, she's not vandalizing someone else's property. She's cleaning her own house. Ella pressed the button. What happened next looked almost beautiful in its destruction. The Nightfall folder began to collapse in on itself, files disappearing in cascading waves. But it wasn't just visual. Throughout the building, systems began shutting down. The screens in the Zenith room that had been showing looped footage of Zach's presentation went dark. Servers in the basement data center started spinning down, their cooling fans quieting for the first time in years. And somewhere in the cloud infrastructure that stretched across 3 continents, millions of lines of code simply ceased to exist. Zach lurched toward the screen, but Catherine grabbed his arm. Don't, she said quietly. It's already done. She was right. The deletion was cascading through the system faster than any human could stop it. Ella had moved on to another folder. Shadow_analytics. Then behavioral_prediction_overrides. Each one a program that Zach had built on top of her father's foundation. Each one designed to extract value from trust, to monetize privacy, to turn human connection into a revenue stream. And each one vanished at the touch of a 9-year-old's finger. You're destroying the company, Zach whispered. He'd sunk back into the chair, his face the color of old paper. Everything I built, everything we are. You're just erasing it. Ella paused, turning to look at him. No, Mr. Miller, I'm erasing what you built on top of what my father built. There's a difference. She gestured at the screen, where the directory tree was now noticeably smaller, cleaner. The Sentinel still exists. The core AI, the privacy protection protocols, the connection algorithms that actually help people. All of that is still here. I'm just removing the cancer you grafted onto healthy tissue. She pulled out the USB drive again, the one with the Nightfall evidence, and inserted it into a port below the screen. New files appeared in the directory, backups, documentation, her father's original design specifications. With methodical precision, she began copying them back into the system, overwriting Zach's modifications with Marcus Ross's original vision. The company's stock is going to crater, Richard said, not as an accusation, just a statement of fact. Without the enterprise data solutions, we'll lose 60% of our revenue stream. Good, Elia replied, not looking away from her work. That 60% was stolen anyway. Better to be smaller and honest than massive and rotten. The screen chimed softly. A message appeared. System restoration 78% complete. Through the windows, the city continued to glow, unaware that somewhere in the digital infrastructure that connected it all, a little girl in a yellow dress was performing surgery on the future, cutting away the profitable lies and leaving only the uncomfortable truth. Zach watched it all happen with the hollow eyes of a man who'd just watched his empire dissolve into smoke and realized too late that it had always been an illusion. The balcony on the 45th floor was restricted access, reserved for executives who wanted to smoke expensive cigars and feel like masters of the universe. But the Sentinel had unlocked it for Ella without her even asking, the glass doors sliding open as she approached, like the building itself was inviting her outside. The night air was cool against her skin. Below, the city sprawled in every direction, a constellation of lights and lives, each one a person who'd trusted their data to a company that had betrayed them. She leaned against the railing, had to stand on her toes to see over it properly, and wondered if her father had stood in this exact spot 9 years ago, looking at this same view, knowing what he was about to do. Behind her, through the glass, she could see Catherine and Richard still in the executive lounge, and phones pressed to their ears, managing the crisis. Zach was gone. Security had escorted him out through a service elevator 20 minutes ago, his emerald suit looking rumpled for the first time, his perfect hair disheveled from running his hands through it too many times. He hadn't said goodbye, hadn't said anything really, just walked out like a man leaving a party he had realized he was never actually invited to. The door opened behind her. Ella didn't turn. She knew the footsteps, measured, careful, carrying the weight of someone who'd spent too long making wrong choices and was trying to figure out how to make a right one. Miss Ross, Catherine's voice was soft, almost tentative. The board wants to convene an emergency session. They need to know what happens next. What do you think should happen next? Ella asked. Is still looking at the city. Catherine was quiet for a long moment. Then she moved to stand beside Ella at the railing, her expensive heels clicking against the balcony floor. Honestly, I think we need to tell the truth. All of it. Issue a public statement about the data breaches, the unauthorized sales, everything Zach did. Offer users the option to delete their data completely or continue with the system your father originally designed. Let them choose. That'll destroy the stock price. It'll destroy the inflated stock price, Catherine corrected. What's left will be real. Smaller maybe, but real. She glanced down at Ella. Your father used to say that a company built on lies can only grow as long as people believe the lies. But a company built on trust can grow forever because trust compounds. Ella finally turned to look at her. Well, you remember that? I remember everything he said. Catherine's voice cracked slightly. I just chose to forget for a while because forgetting was more profitable. The balcony door opened again. This time it was David Okonkwo, the CTO, followed by 3 other executives Ella recognized from her father's emails. The ones who'd worked with Marcus in the early days, who'd watched him get pushed out and had convinced themselves it was just business. They all looked like they'd aged a decade in the past 2 hours. David approached the railing, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. We found something in the system restoration files. A message from your father. It was set to appear only after the purge was complete. He held out a tablet. Ella took it, her small hand barely able to hold the device steady. The screen showed a video player. Her finger trembled as she pressed play. Her father's face appeared and Ella's breath caught. She'd seen photos, of course, watched old home videos her aunt had saved. But this was different. This was recent, or at least recent from 9 years ago. He looked tired but determined, sitting in what she recognized as his old lab. Ella, his voice came through the speakers, warm and achingly familiar. If you're watching this, it means you were brave enough to do what I couldn't. You walked into the place that erased me, and you made them remember. His smile was shown but proud. I'm sorry I had to leave this burden for you. Sorry you had to grow up faster than any child should. But I knew even when you were just a baby that you had something I didn't. The ability to stand firm without bending. I was too soft, too willing to compromise, or too hopeful that people would choose right when wrong was more profitable. He leaned closer to the camera. You're going to have a choice now. You can sell what you've inherited, take the money and live a life where none of this is your problem. No one would blame you. You're 9 years old. You've already done more than anyone could ask. His expression grew serious. Or you can stay. Rebuild what I started. Show the world that technology can still be a force for connection instead of exploitation. It won't be easy. There will be people who fight you every step of the way. But if you choose this path, know that you're not alone. I built safeguards into the system. People I trusted, resources I hid, allies who are waiting for someone worth following. He reached toward the camera, and for a moment, Well, it almost felt like he was reaching for her. Whatever you choose, Ella, know that I'm proud of you. You're my greatest creation, my best code, and I love you. The video ended. Ella stood there, the tablet in her hands, the city lights blurring as tears finally came. Behind her, the executives waited in respectful silence. When she spoke, her voice was steady despite the tears on her cheeks. Tell the board we convene at dawn. We have work to do. Catherine nodded. What should I tell them the agenda is? Ella handed back the tablet and turned to face them. These adults who'd forgotten what integrity looked like, who were now looking at a 9-year-old for guidance. Tell them we're bringing my father home. The sun rose over Miller Tech headquarters, painting the glass towers gold. And somewhere on the 45th floor, when a little girl in a yellow dress was rewriting the rules of an industry that had forgotten who it was supposed to serve. Because in the end, power doesn't belong to the loudest voice or the biggest ego. It belongs to the ones brave enough to stand for what's right, even when the whole world is laughing. If this story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to remember that age is just a number, but integrity is everything. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And drop a comment below. Tell me, have you ever had to stand up to someone more powerful than you? What happened? I read every single one. Remember, the most dangerous person in any room isn't the one with the most money or the biggest title. It's the one with nothing to lose and everything to prove. Until next time, keep standing tall, even if you have to stand on your toes to do it.